Welcome back to the Beast Game Podcast, and it's fantasy time on HBO Max and Amazon Prime, and our fantasy expert, holder and keeper of the Dragon's Breath, Keith. He loves dragons, everybody.
Dragons are the shit.
It didn't really exist, Joe. All right,
They existed.
they existed in that one terrible Transformers movie. Keith has watched Rings of Power and also Game of Thrones, and I had saw maybe all of 30 seconds of Game of Thrones, House of Dragons, and I was like, I can't do this again because it was like somebody said "Your Grace." I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh god, I'm not big into fantasy stuff. Science fiction, big into it. Fantasy stuff, that's all Keith's territory. So Keith, how'd you feel about I guess you said you watched one episode of House of Dragons?
First episode.
All
I need to catch back up to that.
So let's talk about that first. Game of Thrones was really, really big. Really big up to a certain point. And then it flooded out, I guess, those last two seasons because they tried to milk it, and they're milking it now. But how is it?
It's good.
I know that dude that was in The Crown.
Mm-hmm.
It was Prince Philip.
Matt Smith.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's also in that terrible Venom movie, but go ahead.
He's fantastic. House of Dragon takes place 170 years before Game of Thrones, and it's kind of the height of the old kings, the Targaryen rule. So, dragons, lots of dragons. They got plenty of dragons, and basically, it's the king passed away without a legitimate male heir. Well, he did have a legitimate male heir, but there was some issue with
He was like
the succession.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a daughter. He has a daughter. He passed the throne to his son, who is not that strong. And essentially, it kicks off with his wife is set to give birth to a son. He's got a brother played by Matt Smith, kind of a loose cannon, and he has a daughter who is his oldest child, his only child. And his daughter is kind of a free spirit almost, but she kind of knows that she's not going to inherit anything. She's basically going to get married, living life, flying around with a dragon, and being out as she is. However, things take a turn for the worse. Queen dies in childbirth. There is no male heir from the current king, Viserys, and that's where the intrigue. He ends up making his daughter the heir, and all kinds of hullabaloo happens. Because of the Targaryens, they are kind of a separate race from humans, almost. They pretty much practice incest.
Keeping the race pure.
That's exactly what it is. Intrigue, there is incest, there is betrayals, a lot of bloodiness. So far, so good. The pacing's been well done, based off of not a fully fleshed out series of novels, but one specific book that kind of read like a Western history
kind of like
novel.
Outline, basically.
Yeah, like a textbook you would read for Western civilization. And they basically talk about House of Targaryen, describing this period of when it got to the point of decline, put it that way. The expectation is that there's a whole lot of shit that's about to happen that would set the pace for what happens in Game of Thrones.
Because I know that, isn't it still supposed to be like a Jon Snow show?
That dude is smart. He would stay the fuck away from that. There is no saving what's happening with that Game of Thrones. But they were talking about it. They were talking about a couple other things to pop off. But in truth, this is kind of the way to go. Like they just need to they just need to shut it down. Like shut it down. And then in 20 years or 30 years, redo, retell Game of Thrones. Hopefully when George R.R. Martin has finished the books, and then they can redo it in like 20 years or something like that.
So
but
it's basically Star Trek Enterprise, but for Game of Thrones.
Pretty much. Prequel, and it's already fleshed out. So that's where the benefit comes from, is that it's not an interpretation. It's taken straight from, you've got a beginning, middle, and end that's already been written out.
Right.
And they don't have to embellish.
Where Game of Thrones went wrong.
Yeah, so like the last 3 seasons of Game of Thrones, 3 seasons, I would say, from Game of Thrones, they were on their own. Like, Martin didn't have shit to do with it. He wasn't giving any hints. Like, in fact, he's 10 years. I think his last book was 10 years ago. I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't even read that book. I was going to wait for a couple of books to get ahead, or at least for him to finish before I got back into it.
So, switching gears a little bit, other large fantasy franchise, Lord of the Rings, Amazon has purchased the rights to, I guess, what would be like a prequel short story, something?
No. They purchased the rights to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They did not purchase the rights to the actual prequel to those novels.
Okay, but this is Rings of Power, which is what? Some people calling it racist, calling the fandom racist, or like harassing some of the people on the show. I don't know what's going on, but I just know what I read. Go ahead.
Let me tell you this right now. Let me just lay it out for you. All of the anger and vitriol is warranted. I am not a Tolkien fanatic. I am one of those people. I do not think diversity is a bad word. I thought the Lord of the Rings trilogy was extremely monochrome. However, the man who wrote it lived in England. It is what it is. The diversity in Lord of the Rings could have come from anywhere outside of what they've done. For instance, like Tolkien focused the Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth on this centralized area, all white. However, there were other neighboring nations that were of different races.
And same thing happened in Game of Thrones. I mean, it was just like there was one area where all the ethnic people lived in.
Across the sea and the other isles, they were there. Found their way to Bravos, which was kind of like the Game of Thrones' version of Italy, where there's a lot of mixed races and stuff. In terms of this and Tolkien and everything, he was making a mythology for England, an English mythology. Therefore, just like you wouldn't say, how come Greek mythology doesn't have any blacks? Because there were no Asians in Greece. I mean, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. I've said that, and I've said the criticism is valid. It is highly fucking valid. Makes no goddamn sense. The diversity they put into this makes no damn sense.
Well, I mean, it's Amazon, so a prerequisite before they even authorize any type of show that it has to meet the ESG score stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, BlackRock runs the economy. BlackRock basically is blackmailing companies into doing diversity. This is really what's happening. Go ahead.
All right. So here's the thing. The diversity is not the problem with the show. That sounds a little confusing. All the vitriol I say is accurate. However, the problems is not the forced diversity. That is not the problem. In fact, the one actress that they put up there, the Black Dwarf, she's actually one of the highlights of one of the episodes.
Yeah, I think that was the one thing that started the whole thing off. But go ahead.
Yeah, she started it off. None of that. She's got a damn beard, facial hair. I was like, what the fuck? I'm like, what is that on the damn chin? I'm like, she's got some goddamn nappy facial hair. I'm like, all right. So it was a whole thing where dwarves didn't have beards, but yeah, she's got some facial hair. I mean, but flat out, she was one of the most pleasant, one of the best aspects of the show. Her and the little scene that she had, fantastic. I loved it. The problem is with the wokeness. And by the wokeness, I'm talking about you've got a lead who is so completely unlikable. Like, she embodies every terrible thing. Like, she has moments that would make you want to just like rip your eyeballs out.
Yeah, I mean,
basically, it's all the women.
Amazon's looking for this to basically be their equivalent of Game of Thrones. That one show, what was that one show?
Wheel of Time.
Yeah, Wheel of Time. I mean, it's all like something of something, Rings of Power, Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that Wheel of Time show was trash. It was some trash. And I read the books. And I mean,
Netflix has Witcher, so.
Which is awesome. The other problem is that, so aside from the fact that it's outside of what the lore happens, so Amazon only had the rights to certain things. They decided to make this a prequel to the Lord of the Rings. However, they couldn't use the source material that would help cement that. There's a book called The Silmarillion.
Make sense, but go ahead.
That they can only use like the kind of appendices from the trilogy, from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. For some reason, their interpretation of those appendices, Galadriel was a fighting commander, typical trope that is happening nowadays in the last 10 years, where you empower them by making all the males idiots and shitbags. So they show her leadership as leading these troops of people. They're like, oh, we have to turn back. It's too dark. It's too cold. We should have gone back years ago. Why are we still going? She's like, no, we go forward. And so she walks forward alone into the darkness. And meanwhile, her own troops are like fumbling and falling around behind them and stuff. So I'm like, that's not how you lead. Yeah, lead from the front, but are fully rested and you're walking on a mile ahead of your people. Like, what good does that do? It was every stupid fucking trope in the world, and it made no goddamn sense. The actress who's playing it just very stiff, very wooden. My biggest problem is that you could have told a story. You could have done 50 different ways with this IP. Instead, you went to the one area that requires the most interpretation, yet has fan base for that, knows all about it. I mean, these
I mean,
like some of these.
I would just say this. I think Lord of the Rings had its time. Kind of the same thing with Harry Potter. I mean, Harry Potter had a little bit longer run, just because the way that the movies came out.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord of the Rings and those core 3 movies.
The Lord of the Rings trilogy, they stand up. They like, in fact, I watched them again like maybe a couple months ago, like in the around the holiday season, and they stand up. Special effects stand up. They are effectively timeless right now. I understand why they didn't want to remake that and redo it or touch that, because they really wouldn't have been able to do it justice, especially with the crew running this mess right now.
Well, I mean, again, it's the problem that's happened in the Harry Potter, where those core Harry Potter movies were fine. They were fine. They were movies of the time. And then once you get this, what the heck is it called? The Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Mm-hmm.
The 2014-ish, 2016-ish level of writing starts to come into play. You start twisting the story to work with that slant that you have.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily work compared to the prior work that was excellent. I mean, again, I haven't watched the show, but I don't like fantasy stuff. But Harry Potter was awesome.
No, I can agree with that. Its biggest sin of this is that. So let's take back all the things that I would say is wrong in terms of me being a fan of the franchise and everything. Let's take that away. I had to take a moment and sit back and rewatch and watch the second episode. I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch this for the show. The problem with the show is that it's got one of your leads is a shit actress. Like, she is just wooden. Her character is poorly written. What she doesn't make any fucking sense. Several scenarios that just they don't make logical sense in what they would do. 2 characters say, hey, we think something happened to this town. Soldier's like, wait a minute, where did this thing come from? Oh, it's from the next town over. Okay, I'm going to go check it out, and I'll let you know what I see when I get back. So a single mother, she says, no, I'm going to go with you. Don't you have a kid to watch? Who the fuck leaves that kid alone just to go travel with some soldier? It's kind of like, why are you going there? And then when she gets there, the only thing she does, it's like a contrived way of making it have a moment where she orders the village to get out of town. Like, she's like, this is my badass moment. Everybody get out of here. It just didn't make sense. And then the pacing was terrible. How they handled travel distance and stuff like that, it was just kind of like, you see a line on the map that kind of draws a line on the map saying so-and-so walked 150 miles to this next location for his next interaction with someone else. And you're like, no, this doesn't make sense. Like, it just doesn't make any damn sense. So it's poorly written. The pacing is terrible. It's actually a lot of just nothing happens in a mix with some action. There were action set pieces in this that were pretty good, but other than that, this show is off to a bad.
I mean, Amazon's betting a lot on this particular show. I mean, it's one of the more expensive shows on Amazon Prime.
It is a bad bet. They put their money into the wrong damn thing. They should have kept their money in other stuff. Like, this was a bad idea. The Rings of Power was a bad idea. Clowns they got running it are basically a bunch of yes men with no creative talent.
Like, honestly, something that, and this is just personally for me, out of fantasy stuff, something that could theoretically come back for like whatever this current generation of people. It's Chronicles of Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
The Christian side of Chronicles of Narnia might not fly well with people. The story itself, that first movie is really good. The second movie is really good. The other ones, yeah.
Yeah, I think the Silver Chair was the next one they were trying to do. But that never came to be.
Are you going to watch more of Rings of Power? I guess this.
I'll watch Rings of Power reluctantly, but I will be watching House of Dragon.
Yeah, House of Dragons is single-handedly revamped HBO Max. Like, somewhere, whoever's in charge of Discovery is like, yes, we did it.
it's a lot of good stuff happening in that show. So I'm like, all right, I like this. I like it. It's well paced, well plotted. I like it.
Let's just wrap this up. So fantasy fix for the next 6 to 8 weeks. I'm not sure how long some of these shows are, but it's probably gonna at least be 6 to 10 episodes, right? But that Rings of Power stuff, every time you turn on the Fire TV, it's like Rings of Power. I'm like, God.
They got to get rid of the showrunners. They need somebody who understands how to tell a goddamn multi-tiered story like this. Like it's basically
J.J. Abrams.
Get the fuck out of here. I'll be honest with you, dude. It's actually almost like it would have been J.J. Abrams-esque, but you'd have had a bunch of that dialogue going on and stuff.
But all right, keeps going to ride a dragon for Halloween. All right, Beast Game Podcast.